We covered in From Russia with Love 8A, I think it was, about the Day of Atonement and how certain religions that are all corrupted are passing their karma off onto the rest of the world. And one of the members posted something this week of an interaction she had with what she described as an Israeli entitled person that she was involved with. And he'd just done his Day of Atonement and subsequently apologised to all of his genteel employees for all of his shortcomings. Well, if you want a confirmation, there it is. One question or statement that came up in the emails that I finally got round to reading some of them after about a week. What would the original heirs do with the trust and the opportunity to choose a path if they had been with us today? I pondered long and hard on this. And the answer is I would suspect they would follow the path of THI and the current trustee. And maybe there's more to them than meets the eye. Next is the next two op-eds tie together before the next music break. And this is a story out of China that the mainstream media have ran with their usual spin. Why? Because they're losing the narrative again. And it's a story of Jennifer Zheng's life in China, and having hepatitis C may very well have saved her life. Back in February 2000, she was arrested for being a Falun Gong practitioner and interrogated intensely about her medical history at a labour camp in China's Dazing County, she said. Her blood was drawn and she told them she had hepatitis C before she took up the spiritual practice. 12 days later, my cellmate died as a result of forced feeding, she told Fox News. Having hepatitis C might have unqualified me as an organ donor. It is the stuff of nightmares, and it has been buried from public view, hard to prove, and shrouded beneath the cloak of silence for almost 2 decades. Well, anecdotes and evidence are slowly bubbling to the surface, like lots of things, that the organs of members of marginalised groups detained in Chinese prisons and labour camps are unwillingly being harvested. The most affected is a spiritual minority. The Falun Gong, who have been persecuted for adhering to a Buddhist-centric religious philosophy grounded in meditation and compassion, have had forced organ harvesting has been committed for years, and Falun Gong practitioners have been one of those and probably the main source of organ supply, according to the report, pointing to a growing transplant industry already worth more than $1 billion. The report underscored that there were extraordinary waiting times for organs to be available for transplantation, and that numerous websites advertised hearts, lungs and kidneys for sale, suggesting an on-demand industry. There's that word industry. I would suggest that we replace the word industry with skullduggery. The tribunal concluded that the commissions of crimes against humanity against Falun Gong and Uyghurs had been committed, and witness testimonies provided to the tribunal and interviewed by Fox News paint the picture of an unfathomably callous trade often performed when the victims are still alive. Han Yu was kidnapped on July the 20th, 2015 and detained for 37 days in Beijing's Heidan District Detention Center. In May 2004, 3 months after her father disappeared into a detention center, Han Yu received a call that her father, a Falun Gong practitioner, was dead. But it wasn't until almost a month later that the family was allowed to view the body at Lianjiang District Zhao Zhehong village morgue, with dozens of authorities surveilling their every move. I saw obvious injuries on his face even after the makeup. The severe bruise below his left eye stood out, and there was a trace of stitches starting from the throat down to where his clothes covered, according to Han Yu. I tried to unbutton the clothes. The police saw that and quickly dragged me out. Later, another family member went in and continued to unbutton and found stitches that went all the way to the stomach. She suspects her father was a victim of organ harvesting. The family was not given an autopsy, who stressed, and the body was hurriedly cremated. Moreover, the China Organ Harvesting Research Center, which also testified before the China Tribunal, published its own incriminating report in July after years of underground research and analysis, deducing that the on-demand killing of prisoners of conscience is driven by the state, ran on an industrial scale, and carried out by both military and civilian institutions. China boasts that it sustains the largest voluntary organ donation system in Asia, but experts contend that the country does not have a history of willful organ donation, and the official figures of 10,000 transplants each year understates the real volume, which researchers pledge is likely upward of 60 to 100,000 annually. According to the COHRC, there are mountains of money to be made, and data from 2007 showed that hospitals charge more than $65,000 for a kidney transplant, $130,000 for liver, and more than $150,000 for lung or heart. Desperate patients might make a high price donation for a new organ at top speed. Now, this practice is alleged to have started in the 1990s on a small scale. Yes, it was. This, as a side note, there was people in my hometown in Liverpool who were rather inebriated and were waking up in a place they don't remember going to on the road with organs missing. And the media covered it up, but it was happening fairly regular. But it kicked into gear around 2000 and focused on the Falun Gong, and it was initially characterized as targeting the forcible removing of organs of prisoners on death row. China later claimed that the death row prisoners consented to donate their organs to the state to redeem themselves for the crimes they had committed against the state, a practice China claimed to have stopped in January of 2015. However, the explosion of organ transplant activities in China from 2000, together with reports of thousands of transplant tourists going to China to purchase organs, suggests a larger supply of organs than could be sourced from executed criminals alone, according to the tribunal. The scale of the Chinese transplant industry, skullduggery, together with other evidence points to the possibility that China is involved in the forced organ harvesting and selling for-profit organs from prisoners of conscience, according to Grace Yin, a leading researcher at the COHRC, also asserted that by admitting to less severe abuse and proclaiming it was only happening to those awaiting capital punishment, the government was purporting to divert attention away from the more severe issue. Now, the root issue still goes back to the Communist Party's persecution of faith groups and its animosity towards groups that it perceives as threats to their ideological control, she said. Olivier Enos, a senior policy analyst and Asian study expert at the Heritage Foundation, concurred that the organ harvesting has long been a largely overlooked aspect of human rights abuses and has been predominantly reported by the Falun Gong. In recent months, however, as the crisis in Xinjiang gathered steam, new reports have emerged that the Uyghurs may have had their organs harvested also, she observed. Xinjiang, also referred to some by as East Turkestan, has made headlines with the revelations that upwards of 1 million belonging to the Muslim minority have been carted off into concentration camps. Now, Chinese leaders have categorically denied misconduct, insisting that the Uyghurs are in re-education camps, and doubled down that the government respects religious rights. Now, 4 Uyghurs tested before the China Tribunal that they had been organ scanned whilst in detention. Sally Hudiar, ambassador to the US for the Eastern Turkestan government in exile and a leader in the beleaguered Uyghur community, told Fox News that the Chinese government claims that written consent is required for all organ transplants, but in reality it's hardly likely there was any such consent, and if there was, it would have been extracted through torture. That is a fairly horrifying story to read and hear. We hear about it a lot more behind the scenes, and it's indicative to the Mexico problem and the wall. But isn't it atypical of the mainstream media to suddenly get involved in these stories, and you have to ask why? Well, the reason they've got involved in is it contains hefty doses of misleading truth in that document, in that article. Making out the poor Falun Gong are being tortured and they are the victims is almost a rerun of the World War II narrative, when it's the leaders of that Falun Gong group who are actually carrying out this program. Not for China, that's the illusion, but the Zionist division of the Order of the Black Sun. It's a common practice of victim and saviour to throw people off track of the program that they are running. Now, the Falun Gong is a spiritual practice of Buddhist traditions, and as 8B, From Russia With Love 8B show revealed, all of it is corrupted in snake symbology, mantras and mandalas. And I want to make it clear again, I'm not trashing the people or what the basic principles of those practices are doing. Like I said in the show, they carry many of the basic principles and ideals and morals that we will all require going forward but we can all carry the basic ideals within us. That's the kicker. Why do we have to label it? Generally paying a fee to join that label. And the answer is we don't. It's exactly the same principle of not needing a church to reach out to source. The church is the illusion. The cult of the Order of the Black Sun has taken over all religious and spiritual groups, changed the script and the path of purpose, not to enlightenment as many think and seek out, but to endarkenment of these satanic psychopaths. The Falun Gong is the front, the entrapment organisation to lure people in who seek enlightenment and wish to shine their beacons of light. Those at the head of that front are amongst the darkest of entities on this planet. The Falun Gong operates in Israel also, and is responsible for the harvesting of organs of Palestinians and several other neighbouring countries as well. The ordinary people in the Falun Gong, like the ordinary Jewish people in the camps, are being used as patsies to cover up a criminal front. It brings in guilt and shame for the nation it was carried out in. Then the cult harvesters those sympathies and ask for reparation money, none of which goes to the people themselves, and allows the dark programme to carry on running, like what happened after World War II. It's the same programme. All feel sorry for the Falun Gong group, when the heads of that group are those doing it to these people. Are you seeing the pattern now? I read a piece on the Falun Gong and the Zionist organ harvesting, which I was going to put in an op-ed for the show previously, which, although I did reference it, I never got round to doing the full article. Now, mysteriously, or not, that article has now since disappeared. Why? Because the mainstream media and Fox News are running a new narrative. That's how it works. And it's all because the Falun Gong is a psyop being run by the neocon Zionist agent Elliot Abrahams. So let's look at Mr. Abrahams and see if you can connect the dots. He is best known for his involvement in the Iran-Contra scandal during the Reagan administration, which led to his conviction in 1991 on 2 misdemeanor accounts of unlawfully withholding information from Congress, and was later pardoned by George Herbert Walker Bush. Now, during George W. Bush's first term, he served as a special assistant to the president and senior director on the National Security Council for the Near East and North African affairs. And at the start of Bush's second term, Abrams was promoted to be his deputy national security advisor for global democracy strategy, and in charge of promoting Bush's strategy of advancing democracy abroad. What would George W. Bush know about democracy? That clown couldn't even spell the word, never mind understand or implement it. And in the Bush administration, Abrams was a key architect behind the Iraq War. Go figure. As Assistant Secretary of State, Abrams advocated for aid to Guatemala under the then dictator Efrain Rios Montt. 30 years later, Rios Montt was found guilty of overseeing a campaign of mass murder and torture of indigenous people, genocide in Guatemala. Oops. Same plot used on Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. And you all know who carried out that plot in Guatemala. Same people. Abrams frequently defended the human rights record of the El Salvador government and attacked human rights groups as communist sympathizers when they criticized the El Salvador government. In early 1982, when reports of the El Mozote massacre of hundreds of civilians by the military in El Salvador began appearing in the US media, Abrams told a Senate committee that the reported number of deaths at El Mozote was not credible. Are you seeing the pattern now? Like I said, he was involved in the Iran-Contra affair. Go figure. This is like From Russia with Love 7 again, is it not? And during the investigation of Iran-Contra, Lawrence Walsh, the independent counsel tasked with investigating the case, prepared multiple felony counts against Abrams. He admitted that he knew more than he acknowledged in his congressional testimony, cooperated with Walsh, and entered into a plea agreement. This is where justice becomes just us, in which he pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanor accounts of withholding information from Congress. For failing to cooperate, he would have faced felony charges of perjury over his congressional testimony. He was sentenced to a $50 fine, probation for 2 years, and 100 hours of community service. Just us, not justice. He was then pardoned by George Herbert Walker Bush in December of 1992. Abrams had advanced knowledge of and gave a nod to the now Venezuelan coup attempt of 2002 against Hugo Chavez. And on January the 5th, 2019, Secretary of State, here's that name again, Mike Pompeo appointed Abrams as the United States Special Representative for Venezuela. You can't make this stuff up. Elliott was involved on a government level of several human rights groups and councils. What this tells you is the term human rights is a front for subversion of that country and their people. It's the same as charities. They're not interested in charity, only the theft of public money to run their clandestine operations. Elliott Abrams, born in New York, born to Jewish parents. Do I have to say any more?